Welcome to The Truth and This Art Beyond, and we are back in Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. I am your host, Rob Lee. Thanks for listening. And I'm excited today to be in conversation with my next guest, a serial entrepreneur, a founding partner, and chief strategist at the Growth Collective, a partnership with the vision to provide access to resources and capital that will elevate communities of color and generate wealth for neighborhoods victimized by systemic racism. Please welcome Tayyib Smith. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for asking me to join.
And before we get into the sort of main theme of today's conversation, I want to give you the space to share your background, perhaps some of those early experiences that might show up in your work today. And I think is something interesting in that, right? Where, oftentimes people are like, I'm not doing anything that's connected to what I experienced growing up. And I look at when I used to get in trouble I did a mural when I was a kid. And you see I'm bespectacled, such as yourself. Mm-hmm. And I got paint on my glasses and I got into so much trouble. And I was like, I'm not going to be an artist. I'm going to be around the artists.
So, at different times in your journey, you probably answer the same question in different ways. And I would say where I am today at 52, some of the formidable experiences that I think define or have influenced my work. One of both my parents being, progressive people in the Black nationalist movement, people who were, most of the things in our household would have fallen under the description of the Black arts movement. So whether that's jazz musicians, poets, activists, hustlers, just people who were trying to find some form of liberation in their work, in their activities, even in their dress, how they wore their hair. So, controversies before I was 5 was both my parents naming me Tayyib bin Abdul Malik al-Bazir Smith in 1971. I have a cousin in North Philadelphia. And she says, "Oh, you was the first child with one of those African names." She was like, "There was nobody before you," at least in my world, right? So, contemporarily, I live a very progressive, diverse life. But I think retrospectively, even me being involved in real estate or going through a bunch of endeavors, like creating an art project around the history of redlining. Being a board member at the Black Star Film Festival, being in a partnership with an investment group looking for ways to develop, holistic community development models. I could take that back to being on looking for an apartment with my mom and her cursing out the realtor, basically being like, "Motherfucker, I asked you for this neighborhood. Why are you taking me over here?" And in that, her saying something about redlining and me being like, "What's redlining?"
Yeah.
Right. So some 30, 40 years later, it's those formidable memories that kind of define your worldview. I also have a really good friend, Dante Neal, who's an artist in Philadelphia. And, he said to me one time, he was like, "You don't even know." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And, he was describing to me that my formidable years were so progressive. So, in a language of Black liberation, that he's like, you don't even know that other people didn't have that perspective. Right. Or one of my formidable memories is asking my dad where white people came from and him taking me to the fridge and pointing to Europe. Right. I remember that. Yeah. And, that's a funny narrative, because how many Black children who have such, I had posters with Idi Amin, do you know what I mean? Or all of the, anti-colonialist leaders in Africa. Those were my formidable images with Black G.I. Joe figures. Those are very young, things. But when I talk to some of my friends who didn't have that perspective, it makes me see that that's a part of my fortune, you know. And then another, kind of dissonant chord in relation to that,
Sure.
those formidable experiences when I went outside of my parents' ecosystem or community. You have to fight the constant indoctrination of our education systems, our business systems, our systems that teach us about history. Mm-hmm. So there's an element, as children, where you become defiant of your home, images. So like one of my rebellions when I was 18, I joined the Navy without telling anybody in my family. And, I just came home, started telling people, and it was like, you did what? And like retrospectively, that was me trying to be independent. That was me buying into a certain level of propaganda about, like what a young man does. Yeah. But that was rebellion. You know what I mean? Then I had to go into that experience and have all those formative, experiences, be like, wait, what are we doing in Panama? Oh man, some colonialism. You know what I mean?
Right, man. I mean, you briefly mentioned G.I. Joe, and I couldn't help but think of a black shipwreck for some reason. I'm in the Navy now. It's like, where did that hat come from? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, and thank you for it, because we're definitely going to be tapping in on a few other things. And I think this definitely really helps sort of set the stage. So, talk about like when you started moving in like the direction of, this is what I want to do with my life. I see, different like sort of cross sections that ultimately connect with Black folks, whether it be, the Institute of Hip-Hop Entrepreneurship, whether it be, the collective, which we'll definitely talk about much more later, but talk about that a little bit. And to give you a moment to kind of ruminate on that, I'll throw this out there. So I'm a huge Black dude, that's just my setup. And I'm a very smiley individual, especially when I get into a conversation, as you've probably noticed so far. Mm-hmm. And you'd be surprised. You hear some of the weirdest things. I hear from some folks who might look like me that I'm not Black enough. And I hear from some folks who are white who will say I'm militant. And it's like, I'm just me. Mm-hmm. It's like, how am I both? And it's like, oh, maybe the subject matter, maybe the lens in which I'm doing these interviews. But it's very interesting.
So, so Black or white, when people say someone's not Black enough, like, I definitely think we have to evolve past tropes of people policing other people's identity with Blackness. And I would say, throughout the diaspora, there are probably different versions of how white supremacy, will put, I'll say, a white face on your identity when you're just living through your lived experience.
Right.
So I would say personally, like, I feel fortunate that I was raised by a mother in particularly that didn't put any constraints on my ideas of what Blackness can encompass. And I think that's a constant, fight that we have to exist in to, evolve beyond tropes and evolve beyond kind of minimizing perspectives on what we inhibit or inhabit, in the past, present, or future.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And it, like, I did and to kind of combat some of that, because I didn't come, live in that sort of dynamic. It's just like, you be you, whatever that might be. And I did it for a while, and I'm thinking about bringing it back. I did a podcast for a while called Just Like Unofficially Black. And it was this sort of, how you have like the barbershop podcast now, and there's way too many of those, but it was just kind of like, hey, we both had this same thing of you're not Black enough, because we had me and my buddy, my co-host at the time, we were talking about traveling to, we joked about it, but we were talking about traveling to LA And it's like, oh, you going to like, watch some like rap concert or whatever the thing du jour would be. And I was like, nah, we're gonna watch sweaty Asian men like wrestle because we were watching Japanese pro wrestling. And it's like, black people don't do that. And I was like, but we're the things. We're the guys. So we would cover like the news, but from that perspective of kind of like not being black enough, but talk about whatever is right there on our radars. That's what we were doing.
You just gave me a flashback of like early Afropunk when James Spooner first started it, and it like even the first documentary that he created around Afropunk, it was really about like all of the black people in different, progressive arts, music, visual art spaces who where their blackness was questioned. And ironically, it evolved into like this, cosmopolitan blacker than thou perspective. That's interesting. That's interesting.
I had the opportunity to interview James. I met him last year.
Cool.
And it was great. And I think in speaking with him and looking at, watching the documentary on YouTube, and I just started looking at it. I was like, I want to do this, from like, because I joked him, I was like, so 20 years later, are we doing this? He was just like, nah.
Well, he bowed out in the early mid aughts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it, like many things, it grew to have a life of its own.
Right.
Yeah.
So were there like some stops like along the way when you were like, I know that this is where I want to focus my energy at. This is where I can do the most good. Like you touched on earlier with real estate, and we were touching on a little bit about the Institute of Hip-Hop Entrepreneurship and many, many, many other stops. Because like my internet searches earlier and put it in your name, I was like, the students everywhere.
Wow. You know what, man? One, thank you for that. Two, I'm fortunate that I have like this deep curiosity that keeps me on different journeys. When you say doing good, I'm just, I've just been a hand to mouth entrepreneur who's trying to survive and like do things that in some way either contribute or pay respect to the people who helped me get here. Even the ones who I might not even know their names. You know what I mean? Like we all stand on the shoulders of others. So I don't really see myself in like the do-gooder space. I see myself as like a curious entrepreneur who just keeps trying things. So, I had one experience with this, one of the fellows from the Institute of Hip-Hop Entrepreneurship one time. He wanted to do something. It was like some type of business around coffee. And my co-working space is right across the street from La Colombe and, at 15th Street. And I was like, well, I know the owner and like, I know some people who work there. Let me figure out and we can talk and you could go over there and you could work there. And he also saw himself as someone who was like a thing, an artist, like a brand. And he was like, but I don't really see myself like working in coffee. And I got so upset. I wanted to shake him. And I started talking to him like, why do you think how come we can only see ourselves performing or being the talent or being on a field in some way? And when I was cursing him out, I started thinking about myself. And I started thinking about my first, not that I ever, outside of being a little kid, but like once I was like a teenager on through my 20s, like my relationship with entertainment was supporting other people. But in me cursing him out, I realized that I was like, oh shit, I'm talking to myself, right? Because, my first ideas of what it meant to be a business, a hustler, a businessman, an entrepreneur was through the things that I saw. Yeah. Right. And, we have such a limited palette that Black men in particular are given in terms of possibilities. Mm-hmm. Right. I've had the experience of talking to high school students or middle school students, and the questions I get back from them scare me.
Yeah.
All right. And if, I had one day I might have talked to 75 kids over the course of 4 hours, and like they couldn't name 7 careers. Right. They could only name like ball player, social media, like some type of performer. And although I had a journey through entertainment, it really scares me that we don't give more pathways to people affecting like the built environment, our civic infrastructure, like the future of work in general.
Yeah.
So again, like that's a complication that really concerns me. And even in the Institute of Hip-Hop Entrepreneurship, like we won that grant. It was a $300,000 grant from the Knight Foundation, and it came from a National Challenge Award. So 4,500 people submitted ideas. There was probably 150 finalists, and then there were 38 ideas funded, and that was one of them. So it enabled us to work with 24 fellows over 9 months, and 3 people got $10,000 to start their business. Now, in that experience, I learned so much about myself, about those young people, about the contemporary work environment. But one thing that is challenging, we have a narrative about Black business ownership and entrepreneur that is strictly through the lens of exceptionalism. All right. So even in our, respectfully, like Earn Your Leisure type podcast environment, or like the LLC entrepreneurship, Instagram, the person selling classes and stuff like that, even the things that we reference, they're like moonshots, like, I don't want to hear you talking about, like, don't give me Jay-Z quotes when you can't hire 3 people.
Right.
Or, you're a small business if you make less than $10 million a year annually. I live in a city where 2.3% of the businesses are Black owned, but we make up 40% of the population. Of that 3.3%, there's a minuscule number of people who are doing more than $1 million a year in revenue. Right. So the conversation about business and the intergenerational structural racism that has removed us from equity to have investment in businesses. A lot of the narratives around entrepreneurship and small business have been weaponized against us in a way that is really complicated.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny. Like you mentioned the exceptionalism thing, and that's, I've run into it in doing this and doing it as long as I have. And it's almost this sort of, if I reach out to someone, I don't lead with what my background is, what my criteria is. It's like, when I throw out there, I've been doing this for 14 years. I don't know if I need to audition. You know what I mean? And now I joke about it. I was like, yeah, some of those opportunities don't float over. So if I do an interview with someone from Philly, oh, you're leaving Baltimore, you're doing this other thing. And it's kind of like, you're selling out. It's kind of the echo of that. And it's like, I kind of can do what I want. When you start speaking in terms of like, what almost feels like, I guess what I would deem as, this is me being free, not being beholden to anyone, and kind of setting like, this is what I find interesting. And the thing that you said earlier, being curious, that's the thing that kind of drives me. That's the thing that guides me.
So I'm quick with ideas, but like when I hear you talk about like, you're doing something in Philly, you're leaving us, like that comes from a scarcity mindset. That comes from our traumas. Philadelphia is a city, to be frank, most of the people who Philadelphia is a part of their brand, they do not have a 215 number, or if they do, they hold it on one since the 90s, and not have a 215 zip code. They're not paying municipal taxes. They are not voting here. And that's from like publishing to brand to, social media person. Like, then they don't live walking distance to City Hall like me. All right. So, I have experienced multiple generations of an intellectual vacuum of people moving to larger cities for opportunity, right? And I understand it, and I hold a lot of empathy for how just the Black condition is one of almost being nomads. You know what I mean? Like how many of us in contemporary cities that were redlined, that did go through a crack up, Holocaust, that have been left over since white flight, can afford to move back to the neighborhoods where our parents, aunts, and uncles like fought just to keep alive.
Yeah.
After we move to a New York or Miami or an LA or or London, wherever, right? So when you said that, I was like, I just started thinking like, we need to have better dialogue between Baltimore, Philadelphia, Newark, New York. Like, we should be jumping on Amtrak's and talking about like, they doing that to you. This is what our city hall is doing to us. That's what your those state representatives are doing to you. This is how they play us. So I don't, I used to be like Philly, 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 and I still live here, but I had experience years ago looking at displacement issues in multiple cities, particularly Chicago, Detroit, Miami. And when I really got to spend time in some other spaces, I got to see how the same policies were executed on us, how we reacted to them differently. Right? Oh, that's what they did to the West Side. Oh, that's what that happened on 52nd Street. Yeah. So I encourage people. I would really love to explore ways that erstwhile chocolate cities could have spaces where we had a media and a public policy network and a social, political, economic action network to share ideas, resources, and opportunities versus thinking of people, selling out.
100%. Whenever that question comes up and when it's presented to me, like I always come from a position of, I know stuff, but I'll say like, I don't know anything, and then just drop like a truth bomb or what have you. Like I kind of talk about it in Baltimore. It's like, you guys see these changes. I was like, we're trying to ape what DC does. And DC definitely has these sort of vibes of no one really lives there. People kind of just like pass through there. And I was like, I see like really substantial change. Like I remember in Philly when going up there, because I'll go up there to Rec Philly, do the interviews up there. And I remember I like didn't come up there for a month. It was like December. And I was like, it's cold. I'm not going up there. And I just remember it was like, I walk the same path each time from 30th Street. Why is it different suddenly? And then I started thinking back, I was like, I was up here a couple years ago. None of this was here. I see that sort of similar change and similar energy around Baltimore. I'm like, you guys need to be looking at what's happening in Philly, as you were touching on. And I was like, because that's like a year, 2 years ahead of what we're doing here.
Yeah.
So I got one last question before we start talking about the collective a bit. And I kind of touched on it a little bit, as far as like curiosity being a driver for me. We always hear about North Stars. We always hear about what guides sort of whatever our work might be. Do you have like, I like to look at it as truth, like the truth in his art, patent pending or what have you, or trademark. But what would you say are like those three truths that kind of guide you in what you're doing? Is it curiosity in there? Is it like empowerment and support of like Black folk or what have you? Talk about that a little bit.
So I'm going to throw curiosity in one. I'm going to keep it real and say that it's been fear of poverty. Do you know what I mean? Like, I've experienced poverty. I come from people who experience, I come from sharecroppers, like I'm a great grandkid of the Great Migration. Those have been two really important drivers. And, I wouldn't know how to frame it. And in this moment, I can't think of the right adjective, but, just care and dedication that came from the energy of my parents and the people who influenced my parents. You know, my dad's 76 now. He'll be 77 Sunday. My mom passed away in 2009. And, you know, they were extraordinary. They are extraordinary and special people. And oftentimes, regular folk, ordinary people, are not thought of when we think of like the real change. And I'm fortunate enough that I'm old enough. You know, Mark Anthony Neal has a book called Soul Babies. I highly recommend it if you've never read it. But in it, when I read it 20 years ago, I was like, "Oh, this is me. This is what we are." And you know, I was born 3 years after the '68 uprisings. I was born, you know, after the Harvard study of the soul environment, when they figured out that there was a middle-class Black marketplace. I grew up with, you know, positive Black images, whether it was George Jefferson or, you know, that just an ecosystem that I didn't know was designed to get us to purchase. But, you know, I also grew up in an age where people went to City Hall or went to Harrisburg and they talked about Black power. And I didn't know until, you know, kind of looking at Mark's work, that we were punched in the gut and the face by the crack cocaine 80s, right? So you grow up with this one like perspective, and you're hit with this like Reaganomics reality.
Yeah,
I feel like the juxtaposition between those two realities kind of forged my social political identity. So part of that is like, you could call it Afrofuturism, and then the second part is like just pragmatic, like, oh, this they're bringing the Dark Star. Oh, this is what we dealing with. Oh, okay, I gotta change it up.
every now and again, when someone does the thing of like, all right, so what's your perspective on things? So it's like, look, I was born in 1985. I was like, so there's some weird prominent things that happened there in the Black community. And it was like, it's kind of baked in. And looking at like maybe how the household setup was and things of that nature, living in the projects, all of that different stuff. Mm-hmm. And just like, my parents were very aware of what was happening during that time. We were talking crack, we're talking, you know, AIDS, we're talking all of these different things. And my dad's a veteran, so you have that as well. Those things like are baked into like, yeah, how was it growing up? Not bad. And then when you become an adult, like, oh, that's what was happening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, just to speak about that being an adolescence of the crack cocaine 80s, like, it makes me really curious, you know, the children who are living through the opioid epidemic, like how that will frame their futures.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Things are cyclical. They just come back in just a different shade of paint, just, you know, slightly different color.
Yeah.
Mm. So I want to switch gears a touch, but I still think it connects to the overall theme here. So I got 3 questions. This is like the 3-question chunk. Tell us about the collective. I mean, just for those who are undipped, unfamiliar.
Mm-hmm. So the Growth Collective, which we've evolved into, is set up as 2 companies, one being a fee-for-service consultancy, and the other is actually an investment group. There are 7 Black-owned real estate companies that are our primary members and clients. And then my partners, Sandra Dungy Glenn and Stephen Saunders. Sandra coming from more of a political consulting perspective. And she used to work with Shaka Fatah. She worked with Senator Hughes, both Pennsylvania state representatives and senators. But she comes from a different era of political engagement. Steve and I like to tease her and say we brought her to capitalism. Stephen is a pension fund manager. He has another company called Beltrade Capital. He's raised much more money than I could ever imagine in his lifetime. And years ago, pre-COVID, probably like 2017, 18, Sandra and I had first met. And then when the opportunity zone policy was rolling out, we went on this journey talking to political representatives, stakeholders, people at site control, investors, because the language of the policy didn't connect with the reality of the policy. All right. So we were shocked and awed to talk to, frankly, some representatives who represent, Black constituents who did not read the policy and didn't understand it. And, we're speaking about guardrails that we where didn't exist. So in that endeavor, we gathered probably around 9 different real estate practitioners, primarily real estate developers, and realized that we had more in common. And some of the institutions, lenders, bankers, and investors had different narratives for us. We also learned that someone who's doing a $5 million deal doesn't have the same problems as someone who's doing a $50 million deal. So the person who's doing a $50 million deal doesn't want to necessarily hang out around the $5 million deal person, but there's a shared possibility in the alliance and the exchange of information. So that's kind of how we came to be the collective. And currently, one of our clients is Achievability, which is a nonprofit based in West Philadelphia. Then we're consulting on helping them figure out what to do with their 9 parcels of land to have a positive impact on the community that's there. So long story short, we like to say that we focus on holistic real estate development with the lens towards, repair to Black communities that have traditionally been divested from.
Thank you. That's great. I saw it as both, and I was like, I had it in there, and in each bullet point, I was like, growth collective, and I was like, no, it's just a collective, right? And I was like, which one is it?
Yeah. In slang, we say the collective, but let's say to the IRS, we were the growth collective squared.
That's a great answer to that. So I got these 2 last like real questions here, and obviously you're very I was following the Twitter a little bit, and I was like, hey, this is a really smart dude. I was like, I don't know if I'm qualified for this, and but what are in your opinion, and kind of where your focus is at, what are some of the effective ways to share information and resources to the communities in which you're speaking to? How do you go about it? Because I look at it like this. I had this conversation with someone from a grant perspective, like grants for artists, and it was art administrators of color, and it mentioned, the person I was talking to, they mentioned a lot of these grants are written weird, and it's just they're intentionally vague or intentionally something that's confusing that you're going to waste time on, and you're too busy. It's not knowing who your audience is. So talk about that a little bit. That's just the example that comes to mind.
So I'll go back to my earlier comment of how you would answer questions differently at different stages. And, I've had the good fortune of winning multiple National Challenge Awards from the Knight Foundation. My other company won a Pew Arts and Heritage Award to do a project around the 7th Ward, which is, one of the oldest Black communities in the country, where W.E.B. Du Bois came to study. And I had almost like a Forrest Gump education on philanthropy. And that came from individuals who, I was fortunate enough to receive their mentorship, or they might, believe enough in me to invite me to the right things, that my hard-headed ass just kept asking difficult questions. And then I understood what the nomenclature and the language is, right? So I say that to say that, you started referencing Twitter, right? And Twitter today is not the Twitter of 2008, 2009, 2010, which frankly is similar to the internet experience in general, that it's just not as robust. It's not as engaged, authentic, fulfilling. I can remember actually connecting with people in multiple cities and having thoughtful engagement, people turning me on to things, and it wasn't combative or ironic or just sharing things that aren't intellectually stimulating.
Yeah.
Right. So there's an aspect of the platform economy that for me, you don't really know who, I share things I find of interest, right, on the platform, but you don't know who it's hitting with, right? That's almost just like putting something out there, like putting little notes and bottles and throw them into the Pacific Ocean. Like, you don't know, somebody might get it, somebody might not. But to actually get like the cheat code, the information, the person to say like, don't do it that way, I can save you 3 years, all right? Nobody ever says that, but their actions might actually save you 3 years, right? I really believe in, and I'm reacquainted with how much we have to have one-on-one conversations with people, and how much we have to like create networks of nurturing like intellectual thought. Or I'm a big believer in intergenerational community. Right, so I have two colleagues that are in their 70s that I talk to frequently, but they're very successful people who have like more energy than me at 50, and people who are 20 and 30 years younger than me. So I reap the benefits of just that type of knowledge. And I've always, not always, probably since my 30s, I've made an effort to nurture relationships with people who are younger than me. And I don't think mentorship should ever be a one-way street. Right. So in mentorship, there's something that the energy for me should be reciprocal. Right. Like whether it's inspiration, turning me on to something I wouldn't be aware of, translating something for me, like, and it might just be how Gen Xers received boomer love, but I'm not the mentor who, I might ingest, teas or as we say, some people, but it's more of peer energy that, and talking down to people, or quick thought. So there's a type of old head who will say, you got to come sit at my knee, and in my day I did this, and this, and they don't even know the kids' eyes are rolled back in their head because they don't even understand like the contextualization. But I had, and he's not, we're only a couple of years apart, but I had this experience with Theaster Gates, who's an artist in Chicago years ago, and he's heard me tell the story, and he laughs because he didn't remember it. But I was on a bus trip with him and all these philanthropists, and they were showing all his properties in Chicago. And I had met him maybe like 3 or 4 years earlier, and he didn't have as many things going on. And I came to him on the bus, and I was like, Theaster, how did you get your business acumen up to the point you're doing all this? And he looked at me, and he looked both ways to see if anybody was listening. And he said, I don't have the business acumen that you or anyone else believes. But if you see something I'm doing right that you can copy or you can improve on, do it. And don't even call me and ask me. Just say I support you. All right. That was such a freeing moment for me, because as a Black man, how many people you might come to for advice, a positive word, an autograph, a shout out. Please listen to my demo, and they will show you their ass. Right?
This is true.
But here was, someone who was on their trajectory upward, who was being authentic to me, almost like we were in the Underground Railroad. Like, look, this ain't what you think. I'm trying to hustle too. I'm just trying to figure it out like you. It might be working, but you too can be free.
That's great. So I got one last real question. And then I have like 4 rapid fire questions. Okay. So the last real one goes is this. I just want to get a sense on, we're talking trajectory a little bit there towards the end. Looking towards the future, what are some of the goals and priorities for the Growth Collective, and how do you envision like the organization like moving forward and evolving over the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years?
Ooh, great question. So We're in dialogue with some financial institutions that I, probably shouldn't mention about using some new regenerative investment vehicles to actually put equity dollars into Black real estate developers projects. I think we've done a great job of elevating issues that have been there for a long time within our local, municipal, state, ecosystem. I'd say in the tradition of Black progress, it's always challenging because the facts are there.
Yeah.
Right? Like the figures are there. The lawsuits about divestment in communities go back, longer than me at 52. The number of gaslighting excuses or reasons not to invest in Black and brown people are infinite. So we keep doing the work, we keep struggling, we keep, making wins and trying to influence not just the public policy, but the projects where we can.
Thank you. That's great. Essentially, I love to hear it. So as we wind up in these final moments here, and I gotta ask, this has nothing to relate to. You an Aquarius?
No, I'm an Aries, Pisces cusp.
Okay, my partner's that. I'm an Aquarius. I'm a Capricorn Aquarius cuz. It was either the cusp thing or the Aquarius thing. I look around for it, and I share a birthday with another great Philadelphian, 70s Philadelphian. Me and Questlove have the same birthday.
Oh, really? Okay.
So whenever I see that January 20th pop, I was like, yeah. Me and Quest. It's like you never met him.
I know Amir very well. Very well.
So here's the rapid fire questions for you, and I'll give the same thing I give to everyone. Don't overthink them. They're all over the place. So here's the first one. Thinking back, what is the first record that you owned?
Ooh,
yeah.
So I'd say it's the first record my family owned that I can remember, because I don't recall like what my first purchase record was. But when I was a little kid, Marvin Gaye's "What's Going On" used to give me a headache. And I couldn't understand why.
Yeah.
I remember that when my dad would play it, and I would be like, eh. And I can remember holding the record. And I don't know why, but there was something about that recording that used to make me uncomfortable as a child. So that's the first album that I really remember being consciously aware of, even before really understanding recorded music.
I dig it. What are you currently watching? Is there any shows, any movies that you watched recently? I may have seen a post for some folks. They talk about Succession. I'm definitely watching that. It's a lot of things that are out there, and there's a lot of things that I avoid because there's a attention real estate conversation that happens, and it's like I don't have time for that. So, what are you currently watching and investing that time in?
So, I too find joy in Succession. And I would say it's kind of like suburban people watching The Wire, like problems that I am not connected to at all in any way, shape, or form. But the writing, the cinematography, the wardrobe, there's levels to the things that aren't very loud but are outspoken and suggestions. So it is definitely a guilty pleasure. Outside of that, I cannot stand scripted TV usually. So I'm more of a person who's into documentaries. Recently, I've Arthur Jotha has a couple films on YouTube that I think are exceptional. And that's more that's not traditional linear film. I'm a bigger book person than I'm a content person. I remember how books resonate or make me feel more than particularly contemporary scripted content.
No.
It just doesn't inspire me anyway. But I will shout out Raoul Peck's Kill All the Brutes. Have you seen that? That's really heavy. Exterminate All the Brutes. That's heavy. It's like 5 parts. That's deep.
I mean, I'm over here noting things as we go along. So look, I'll be reaching back out in the email like, yeah, man, I watched it. It's wild.
Yeah.
uh, so I got 2 more. And we were talking about that experience earlier of what Twitter is, right, and what the internet by and large has kind of become. And I find myself, I try to avoid the news, but I find myself actually getting content from the news now because of the proliferation of like fake news and alternative facts and ba. For you, what are your like 3 most reliable sources for information?
Do you watch Democracy Now?
No. Mm-mm.
Oh, so I don't know how long I've been watching Democracy Now. It must be at least 6 or 7 years. But Democracy Now comes on every day at 9 a.m. If you go to democracynow.org, you can see it, and it's also like through Apple TV. But just watch Democracy Now for like 7 days, right? And then go back to mainstream corporate media, and you're gonna be like, "How did I not? Did you know? How did I not? Did you see?" Or it'll come like a week or 2 weeks later in the mainstream press with a different lens.
Mm.
Other than that, recently, I operate in capitalist spaces, but I tend to read more leftist literature. So this year, I've been making an effort to read like the New Republic, Jacobin, more like traditional leftist political periodicals
Mhm.
and journals, because I feel like you get a deeper analysis from long form than the clickbait of contemporary journalism.
That's legit. So this is the last question I got. And this has been my favorite recently because I'm very interested in like, what the guests do, what their things are. So let's say it's super long day, don't have time to really, put together that healthy that meal, but you need something that hits,
Mm,
but it doesn't have to be healthy.
mm.
What is that go-to meal for you? Is there a go-to meal?
Hey, now it's sushi. My wife and I'll just order a bunch of sushi. That's
Get it?
and I only want to go to the spot. I want it at my spot.
I've been the opposite. I've been so like, hey man, like my partner, she'll say like, hey, let's go get sushi. I was like, nah, man, it's changed so much, man. I got to go to the place. It's an intimate experience.
Yes,
It's really
yes.
because they give me a lot of extra sushi because I'm always just there, just getting loose on a volcano roll.
All right, all right. And I can't believe I'm not thinking the right nomenclature. What's it when you go omakase?
Mm.
So there's a great omakase in Fishtown, very expensive. But my wife and I will do that like twice a year. We went for omakase in Manhattan like 2 weeks ago. That's more like the sushi experience for me now. And if I'm not doing that, then just give me a bunch of rolls and let me chill.
I like it. Well, that's it for the interview. Thank you for indulging me in my questions. This has been great. This has been fun. And in these final moments, I want to invite and encourage you to share with the listeners where they can follow you, keep up on anything the Growth Collective related and all of that good stuff, websites, social media, whatever you want to share in these final moments. The floor is yours.
Okay. So for the Growth Collective, we are at thecollectivephl.com. For me personally, I can be found at 215 TAYYIB on Twitter. Don't follow me on Instagram. I'm just kidding, but I'm more interested on I'm more interesting on Twitter probably. Um, I have a project called the Seventh Ward Tribute that my good friend and colleague Brittany Coleman is leading. Basically creating a tribute to the Seventh Ward's history in Philadelphia. I'm on the regenerative leadership team and the board of an organization called the Guild of Future Architects. It's just guildoffuture.org.
Yeah.
I'm on the board of the Black Star Film Festival, blackstarprojects.org. They have a brilliant Terrence Nance exhibit at the ICA right now in Philadelphia. I highly recommend people check out. I'm working on a film project with my friend Cassie Owens, tentatively titled Philly Jazz Legends, about traditional African American dance cohorts in Philadelphia. I executive produced a film by my good friend Chantrell Lewis a few years ago, called In Our Mother's Gardens. Other than that, yeah, that's about it.
And there you have it, folks. I want to again thank Tayyib Smith from The Growth Collective for coming on to the podcast. And I'm Rob Lee for Tayyib Smith, saying that there's art, culture, and an intersection where entrepreneurship lives. In and around your neck of the woods, you've just got to look for it.